HIV cannot be the cause of AIDS.
It condemned a generation to a kind of contaminated idea of sex.
Every single prediction of the HIV theory has failed.
In Romania, I tested negative. In 3 months of being in the United States, I had to get tested again, and I was tested positive.
The curse of being told you're HIV positive has killed in itself because people give up and die.
The belief is that AIDS is infectious, that it's caused by HIV and that you can catch HIV from somebody else. But many scientists and researchers disagree. These views have been skillfully suppressed for decades.
I've never done a story in which there was so much resistance to the story being told.
We've so challenged the way that conventional scientists are thinking and arguing about something.
What it all boiled down to in the end was two men in a room deciding what history was.
I do my work. I'm working on HIV. Do your own work on what you think the cause is and don't bother me.
For the activation of that virus in cells, we need some cofactors.
What we are up against is a gargantuan, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure.
Their statistical sophistry, data manipulation, and voodoo math enrage me.
Some strains of HIV are not sufficient to induce AIDS.
It is dormant all the time. That's one of the major reasons why I don't believe that this virus is the cause of AIDS.
So what we need to understand is that science is not truth.
We reached consensus yesterday here that we killed people with ACT. It's just the question, how many did we kill?
I said, boy, this stuff must be working. And then about another 2 weeks later, it did start working.
I wouldn't give it to my cats. I would think it was murder.
I've been psychoanalyzed for my decision not to take antiretrovirals.
I can find absolutely no believable, persuasive evidence that Africa is in the midst of a new epidemic of infectious immunodiseases.
In Africa, almost 50% of the population has no access to clean drinking water.
It's a very worrying thing that anybody can say today, in today's world, that there is a point of view that is prohibited, that's bad, that they are heretics who must be burnt at the stake. And it's all said in the name of science and health. Can't be believed.
It destroyed my hopes for living, you know.
I had a psychoanalysis. I've been psychoanalyzed for my decision not to take antiretrovirals. I don't know what they call it, but I went to see a lady to determine if I was sane.
The consequences of an HIV-positive diagnosis, the stigma combined with the powerful drug regimes, reverberate into a person's future. This was the case with Lindsay Nagel.
I was adopted from Romania in 1990, and my mom and my grandma went to Romania to come and get me. So they had spent 2 months over there to deal with all the adoption and everything, and then in order to come into the United States, I had to get tested for HIV. In Romania, I tested negative, so then everything was fine. We went to the United States, and then in 3 months of being in the United States, I had to get tested again, and I was tested positive.
Lindsay was given the AIDS drug AZT at 9 months. She suffered serious side effects.
It was unbearable to the point where we wrote to Peter Duisberg after 40 days and nights of this horrible pain. And he wrote back immediately and said, you must take your daughter off the AZT. That is why she's having the pain and all the problems.
The mechanism of action of ACT is embarrassingly clear and simple. It is a terminator of DNA synthesis. DNA is the basis for all life on this planet. It's the central molecule in every living cell.
The belief is that AIDS is infectious, that it's caused by HIV, and that you can catch HIV from somebody else. But many scientists and researchers disagree. These views have been skillfully suppressed for decades by the prevailing scientific orthodoxy and the mainstream media. We've kept an extensive archive over a period of 28 years, which will demonstrate how dangerously wrong science can be.
HIV cannot be the cause of AIDS because it doesn't infect enough cells and isn't active enough. It's only found in 1 out of 8,000 T cells, which are often, not always, lost in AIDS, and that loss can't be due to HIV if only 1 in 8,000 cells are infected.
HIV has never been isolated. Its assumption has been postulated only by indirect means.
Every single prediction of the HIV theory has failed, most notably that HIV/AIDS has remained confined to the risk groups and has not spread to produce a heterosexual epidemic.
The test claims to be specific for the presence of a new virus, something that infects people through sex, something that once you're infected, there's no cure, you're never going to get rid of it. So if you're told that you're HIV positive, it's a most terrible witch doctor's bone being pointed at you. And often the curse of being told you're HIV positive has killed in itself because people give up and die.
We have been told for the last 30 years that an HIV infection is the equivalent to a death sentence. So even if now we know that most people who have tested HIV positive will continue to survive, and most of them in good health for decades, still the perception is it is a death sentence.
When any questions were raised about the science behind this, people said, you can't say that, you're a denialist, because it was as if you were inhuman to question a theory that had been adopted and accepted by the gay community and others.
Meanwhile, virologists were busy virus hunting in their laboratories around the world, trying to find one that could cause AIDS. On one side of the Atlantic, at the National Institutes of Health, Robert Gallo was working on his family of HTLV retroviruses. On the other side of the Atlantic, at the Pasteur Institute, Luc Montagnier was working on a strain he called LAV, cultured from one of his patients. He thought this might be the cause of AIDS and circulated a sample in the customary way to fellow virologists, including Robert Gallo. And here's how the story goes. In 1984, Gallo took out a patent for the HIV test based on his HTLV3 virus. Montagnier thought Gallo may have used his LAV virus for the US patent. 7 years later, Gallo did acknowledge in a letter to the journal Nature that the French virus and his own were the same, and blamed his error on inadvertent laboratory contamination. However, at the time, an acrimonious lawsuit was set in motion surrounding the patent for the AIDS test, when the French sued the Americans. Was it accident or theft, as the French lawyers suggested in court? The whole episode appeared so unseemly at a time when people were dying around them that Presidents Chirac and Reagan were drawn in. They shook hands and decided further litigation would be inappropriate. They did a deal under which patent income from the test and credit for its discovery was to be shared between France and the United States. LAV and HTLV3 were dropped, and it was agreed that the virus was to be called the Human Immune Deficiency Virus, HIV.
Health Secretary Margaret Heckler made the announcement to a packed news conference.
The probable cause of AIDS has been found.
She then introduced the scientist who led the team, Dr. Robert Gallo.
On that very day, Robert Gallo took out a patent for HIV.
What it all boiled down to in the end was two men in a room deciding what history was. As a historian, that is really offensive. It was Gallo and Montagnier sitting together saying, OK, we'll agree that you did this, if we can also agree that I did that part of the process. And then they signed an agreement as to what they said had happened. It was not actually what had happened, it was horse trading about what they could agree had happened for political reasons.
So this is just another proof that what has taken place in Africa is just a relabeling of pre-existing old and mostly preventable diseases, which most of them are poverty related. And so the real scandal in AIDS in Africa is that the West, instead of investing in overcoming poverty, investing to help people to lead better lives and get healthier. So instead of doing this very sensible approach, the West tries to sell toxic drugs and useless HIV tests.
The more the flames of plague terror were fanned, the more the money was poured into research focusing on the virus AIDS hypothesis. The focus on the sexual transmission of AIDS and the hasty and misguided use of HIV tests, originally developed to screen blood products and not for diagnosis, led to an epidemic of mistaken diagnoses in Africa with massive accompanying stigma. This has affected the lives of millions, including young Lucy. Diagnosed HIV positive through a screening test, she was shunned by her community. Philippe Creenan and his wife, working for the French charity Partage, helped Lucy to health and confidence.
It's very seldom you see people who have been stigmatized with AIDS who are not dying a few months later. So Lucy was one of the first persons who, because we didn't support the AIDS tag on her, recovered and was the proof to the community that you can recover from such episodes.
Ninavyofanya kazi na ninavyojisikia hali yangu ni nzuri kama mwanzoni nilivyokuwa kabla sijaumwa.
What would you like to see happen?
Labda nategemea hapo baadaye kuzaa watoto.
In 3 successive tests, Lucy has now been found to be HIV negative. Using bad science to prop up a questionable theory in order to protect financial interests is well known. But when the bad science becomes so entrenched that the voice of the independent scientist can no longer be heard, and when the perpetrators of this bad science can dominate the distribution of research worldwide, then one begins to despair.
So what we need to understand is that science is not truth. It is one system, one belief system that helps us to understand reality. And like any other belief system, it has mistakes, and we need to understand the functioning and try to make the best out of it without taking it for the absolute truth.
The anger comes when I then think about the people who are dying, because this is not a question of simply pushing through the research to convince other scientists. This is a question that every month that goes by, we have several hundreds or thousands of people who died who might have been able to be helped if only we had gotten the research done earlier or convinced more people to move in this direction.
It's a very worrying thing that anybody can say today, in today's world, that there is a point of view that is prohibited, that's banned, that they're heretics who must be burnt at the stake. And it's all said in the name of science and health. It can't be right.
How had Peter Duesberg felt all those years before when he first challenged the AIDS establishment?
A bit like Galileo must have felt when he ended up in prison. Probably somewhat satisfied that nobody could prove him wrong, but also saddened that he didn't get a forum, and in the case of AIDS, that 150,000 people have since developed AIDS in this country. Many of them could have been saved.
The unresolved mystery of AIDS, the numerous predictions that have so patently failed to materialize, linger on as challenges to the scientific community. We've gathered the information you've just seen over a period of 25 years, yet nothing has changed. People are still led to believe that being HIV positive means you've fallen victim to a deadly infection. The textbooks tell us so. It may take a generation for the truth to out.